For me, the canister and the casserole are the same form, just one's a little bit taller than the other. But we'll go over both of them now to see how they're made. After centering a lump of clay, and I use about a pound separation between the different sizes of the canister, like 3, 4, and 5 pounds, for instance. You do your first pull up, and after only one pull, you want to split the lip at the top to make the place where the lid is going to fit. You split that with the sharp wooden tool or anything like that, and then you smooth it off with the chamois to get a flat shape where the lid is going to sit and a pronounced lip, smooth lip on the outside. Now you can go ahead and do more pulls to get it as tall as you need. As soon as you've done that second pull, it's a little harder to keep your hands together, which is always important in keeping a pot stable. At any rate, you can keep going until you get it as tall and as thin as you can. Here I'm starting to rib it to smooth off the throwing lines on the outside and to make the shape more straight up and down. I like a nice cylindrical shape for it. Have to finish the sill where the lid will be fitting again and measure for size. It is nice to have your lids be about the same size. Although if you want, you can make a graduated set of diameters for your canisters as well as in height, as also in width. Okay, so the base is done. It's just a matter of making a lid, and a lid is nothing but a plate with a knob on the bottom of it instead of a foot. Just a matter of getting a nice sort of dome shape to it, not too flat, and getting it the right size. Now, the way that I approach making lids is I try to make them too big on purpose, though not way too big, and trim them the next day to size. If I'm only making one, I'll be careful about measuring them and everything, but if I'm making a set of, say, 10 or 12 of them, it makes more sense to me to make them too large and trim them to fit the next day. Making the knob consists of about probably about an eighth pound of clay, pushing down from the top and in from the side to get it centered and shaped at the same time pretty much, cutting it off later for when it's leather hard. Speaking of leather hard, here it is. Next day or so, I'm going to clean off the bat and carefully turn over the canister to try to keep from distorting it at all. You want it to stay nice and round when you're working with it. Had a little kind of bubble there that got cut through, and if you have much of that on the bottom, you're going to want to fill it up with some clay, but I just touched it up a little bit there. Now I'm trimming the outside to make a nice smooth round edge on that bottom edge and signing it. Turn it over, check it for round again. And trimming the lid, the first important thing to do is to get it to fit. In this case, it did fit already, so I didn't have to do any trimming. If I did, though, I might use some of that clay that was on the bottom there to help it stick and set it in the middle and trim it down with a small loop tool. In this case, again, I'm adding some water to the bat and going to trim it with a large loop tool. Get a nice round dome shape. Also score in the middle where I'm going to attach the knob on. The knobs may want to be protected with a little extra plastic. They'll tend to dry out quicker than the lids while you're throwing it. You might want to cover it with some plastic film for part of the time once it gets leather hard. Okay, you set it down in the middle in the place that you've marked off with the score lines. Help you find the middle. Push down from the top and push in from the side. Smooth it off and the lid is done. Except for I do poke a hole to try to keep it from popping off in the bisque to let the steam out. A casserole is, as I said, another shape like a canister where you pull up, make one pull, and while the sides are still thick, because it takes some downward force, you're going to split the lip to make a sill to set the lid on. Keeping everything lubricated is always a good idea with some water. Smoothing it off with the chamois and doing the final pulls to thin out and belly out the shape of the casserole. Usually I'll have a relative size in mind. Let's see, I think this one's probably thrown from about 3 pounds of clay, and you'll get usually something in the ballpark of 9.5 or 10 inches for a lid if you're throwing it fairly thin. Had a couple little bubbles there that I poked a hole in and smoothed off with a needle tool. Now there's my standard gauge for doing casserole lids. I made this a long time ago out of a piece of wood. It's got the one part of it fits in the inset, and the other part of it will measure for that part fits in the inset there, and if you turn it upside down, it'll measure the corresponding size for the lid. I'm just doing a little smoothing off with a rib in there. It's nice to get a good smooth surface, easy to clean and stuff. So we're going to set aside the bottom of the casserole and make the lid, and also the thrown knobs,
which in this case there are 3 for the casserole, since you need something to take it out of the oven.
This again is the lid, the shallow plate form. And here's where you use the other part of the measuring stick to see if it fits right inside that. And if there's any doubt, it's better to leave it a little big than a little small. You can always trim some off, but it's very hard to add some when it's leather hard. In fact, probably not a good idea. It'll tend to crack. So when you have the lid the right size, you set it aside too. Now it's time to go on to the knobs. Most of my knobs are about the same shape, but they will vary in size according to the item that they're for. The casserole, being kind of wide, might have a larger sort of knob than some of the smaller things. Then, of course, there are lids that I make with the knobs on, which you can see some of the other items on the video. They may have a less pronounced shape than the ones with the knobs made separately. Okay, now this was kind of my own idea, though I have no doubt that other potters have come upon it through time as well. It's a matter of pulling out a ring all the way to the bottom. This is gone. There's no bottom on this thing. And making a shape which will form a kind of a nice lug knob on the side of the casserole. Now the reason I came up with this is that if you just put a pulled handle on the side of a casserole, because it's usually kind of wetter than the casserole, you tend to have it crack off when you apply it to the leather hard casserole. It can be a problem. With this kind of a shape that I've got here, and usually I'll cut it off with a needle tool a little bit, either right now or when it's leather hard. Anyway, we're going to see how it works now. When it's leather hard, I'll cut underneath it with a needle tool to remove it from essentially the sort of pedestal that it's on. When it pops loose, right there, I can clear off the stuff off the bottom there and turn it over. You can also have the bat come loose, which is a occupational hazard. Once the bat gets cleared off, then it's just a matter of smoothing off the bottom with some slip and trimming off a little bit of extra clay if there is any. I'm putting slip both on the bottom where the pores have been exposed in the clay, and on the inside, which is what will actually attach it onto the casserole. Now here I'm using my spackling knife to cut out a sample knob or handle. Then I'm using it as a model to cut another one. Then I thought, well, a lot of people don't have spackling knives, so they could use another sort of knife. And then I looked around and couldn't find one, so that's why I'm dithering around right now. So I went back to the spackling knife to show that you could cut 8 or 10 handles out of one of these things. So actually I think usually they're good for about 4. So if I make 4 or 8 casseroles, I can make a couple of those rings and make enough handles for them all. Okay, so now it's a matter of applying more slip everywhere, especially on those sides where it's been cut and the pores are exposed, and putting slip on where they're going to be applied. And it's always a good idea to slip and score everywhere you attach. I didn't score this, which sometimes I don't. I think it's going to stick okay, but then I think this is for a video. Got to do things right. And show how easily it will pop off. If it doesn't, there it goes, it pops off. So now we put a little more slip on, do a little scoring, and we're going to get a better joint there than if we just did it with slip alone. The nice thing about using these rings for handles is they're going to be just about the same diameter as or the same roundness shape, let's say, as the casserole. So they don't require very much pushing around at all. They just require attaching on, which should be done very firmly to get a good mechanical connection between the two pieces. And you still have to pay attention to the joints where they come together, smoothing it off with a finger, a wet finger, or sometimes a wooden tool like with a thumb end on it, just a nice rounded piece of wood to get a good tight connection there. So there are the handles. Don't try picking it up by it until the pot's been fired. Now we stuck those on first thing before we'd actually trim the casserole. So now it's a matter of turning it over and doing the trimming on the bottom. And this being such a low form, you'll notice I didn't even put any water on the wheel head. I think I can get by with just applying a light touch in the trimming. So now I have to clean up on the bottom. You see what I'm doing right there. You can't see that part from the top, but when you get it turned over, you can see if you have a good joint in that area. But once it's attached, it's a matter of trimming the bottom. I don't know, I decided I'd show something about the knobs there, or the handles. Can't remember what my point is at this point. You could get a little glimpse of it there if you wanted what it looked like in cross-section. It is kind of fatter, the part that goes toward the casserole, so that's an important thing to give it more strength in the attachment. Okay, there we got it trimmed off and signed, and we're just going to take care of any pores with a bit of that throwing slip that I always accumulate in that little pot there. Turn it over carefully without deforming it. Make sure it's not deformed by centering it again, and go on to the lid. There's the knob and there's the lid. Just a matter of turning this guy upside down to trim. There's going to be more trimming on a lid, so I know I'll put a little water on to attach this after I've trimmed off that extra clay there. You know, I use whatever trimming tool is at hand, and sometimes I have preferences. This is an L-shaped Japanese style one that I made out of a street sweeper blade, which I detail on my webpage. But it seems like most trimming tools work for most purposes if it comes right down to it. Okay, anyway, we got the knob scored and slipped, and the area where it's going to go scored and slipped, and we attach it on with some downward pressure and some sideward pressure, concentrating especially on that joint area. There I'm taking a finger to smooth it off again. And once again later on I may poke a little hole with a needle tool from the inside to make sure that the knob doesn't pop off in a nasty surprise in the bisque.